Hi, class. Welcome. It's Dr. Lindner. We're going to talk about a neat concept. A lot of students typically like this when we talk about skin coloring and skin pigmentation, like what can make the skin turn darker, what can make the skin turn red or yellow or orange, um, black. There's different tones, blue. There's a lot of different things that can change the skin, different colors. But for the most part, when we look at one another, we have people who are very, 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 very light skinned. We have people that are very, very, very dark skinned. And we have so many different shades in between. So if we look at, let's say, at my children, for example, I have my older one who's the darkest complexion. And then my middle child is a little bit lighter. And then my third child is the lightest of all. They all look very, very different. And my wife is the darkest of all of us. So we're all different shades. My wife is Mediterranean, so we have mixed breed in the house. Um, so when we look at what creates the different color tones, it's melanin. Now, we all have these cells that are called melanocytes, and we all have the same number of melanocytes in each person, but what differs is the amount of pigment that we produce. And that's why all of our skin tones can vary from white to yellowish to tan to black in color. It can change. Melanocytes convert this amino acid, which is called tyrosine, it converts it to melanin. Tyrosine is a very, very important amino acid. In fact, tyrosine, when it's attached to four iodines, it gives you thyroxine. When you have tyrosine that's attached to three iodines, you get triiodothyronine. These are thyroid hormones. So tyrosine is important not just for your metabolism, for thyroid function, it's also needed where the melanocytes take in the tyrosine and convert it into this protein called melanin. Not to be confused with melatonin. Melatonin is from the pineal gland. Okay. And the UV radiation that comes down in the sunlight is going to increase the amount of melanin that we produce. So here is a melanocyte, and these are all keratinocytes. So we're going to have UV rays that are coming down, that are beating down on us. Okay. And as the UV rays come down, don't forget down in the bottom, we've got the basal layer, which is all stem cells. And you've got blood vessels that are carrying vitamins in there and B vitamins. We don't want the UV radiation to destroy the vitamins, destroy the stem cells, destroy your DNA that lies down here. Okay. So what ends up, think of many vitamin bottles and think of beer bottles. They're not clear bottles, right? They're either green, they're tinted green, they're tinted dark brown, dark blue, to try and deflect the UV rays coming in, so it doesn't destroy the nutritional elements that are found in the beer. The same thing with nutraceutical companies. They tint a lot of the bottles so when these vitamins are in transport, the UV rays don't damage and weaken and destroy the nutritional value. So as UV rays are coming down, the melanocytes release melanin and it moves up in the extracellular spaces, right? It kind of moves and it's creating like a black shield so that as the UV light comes in, it produces more. The black substance, which is the melanin pigment, is going to absorb the rays and protect your DNA and protect the stem cells and protect all the vitamins that are in there from damage. If you go out on a sunny day when it's 90 degrees, how do you feel when you wear a black shirt compared to wearing a white shirt? The black, the melanin is going to absorb all the sunlight, you'll overheat. But if you wear lighter clothing, it deflects it. Okay. So now that we understand a little bit about natural skin pigmentation, well, what can turn the skin yellowish or orange? Um, Keratin that's in the dermis, it is a powerful antioxidant. Keratin, which is like you may have heard it as beta carotene, it is a very, very powerful antioxidant. We have it in our eyes, we have it in the skin, and it's the precursor of vitamin A. So you find it in carrots, you find it in squash, you can find it in sweet potatoes, okay? And we can find it in the stratum corneum and in the dermis. So keratin is very important. Well, what can make the skin look reddish? Well, in the red blood cell, right, that's an RBC, a red blood cell. And from the side view, it kind of looks like that, like a biconcave disc. It's red because of the hemoglobin. Inside a red blood cell is hemoglobin that binds to oxygen. And when it's bound to oxygen, it gives this reddish appearance. Okay, so hemoglobin is the oxygen carrying pigment that's found in blood. So it's hemoglobin and heme, the heme part. When you look at hemoglobin, the globin is the transport protein. Heme has iron. And what binds to iron? Oxygen. That's why when you're iron deficient, you can't attract oxygen, which means if there's no oxygen, how does the mitochondria make ATP? And we know that the mitochondria, especially for the electron transport chain, requires iron. If you're iron deficient, you have fatigue, you're tired. Okay. So when the skin gets flushed and red, when the body temperature increases, it's because the superficial blood vessels, they open up, they dilate, so the skin can act like a radiator and you start to lose heat. Jaundice. Well, jaundice is yellowing of the skin. If you have darker complexion, you may not be able to see the skin turning yellowish, but you can see the white of the eyes turn yellowish. When we have that, it's usually indicative of some sort of liver disease. It's the buildup of bilirubin in the blood from liver disease. So if we look at what happens to red blood cells, when red blood cells break down, they go to the spleen to be broken down. Okay. A red blood cell is nice and big, and then you have a very small entrance, a much narrower blood vessel leading into the spleen. And when the red blood cell is old, like 120 days old, the red blood cell loses its flexibility and it's dying. So it's time to recycle it. So as this rigid red blood cell is trying to squeeze through this tight blood vessel, it bursts as it gets into the spleen. And when it bursts, whatever the red blood cell is made up of, it breaks it down. So there's hemoglobin. So here's the heme, here's the globin, and there's iron as well. So the iron gets recycled, the globin gets recycled, and the heme is going to be converted. So when heme gets converted, it's broken down into bilirubin, which is bound to albumin, which is another transport protein. It gets pulled into the blood, and we have bilirubin that's free, unconjugated. And the liver's job is to conjugate it. What that means is when the liver conjugates bilirubin, it means that it's making it water soluble. When it's water soluble, you can get rid of it through bowel movements or through the kidneys urination. Okay. But when the liver isn't working properly, we get an accumulation and a buildup of the bilirubin. And that's what gives this yellowish appearance to the skin or to the eyes, to the white of the eyes. If someone's an alcoholic and the liver cells are dying, if someone has hepatitis, if someone has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, um, all these things can start to destroy liver cells. Cyanotic. If you have a printer that takes blue ink, usually the blue ink is called cyano. So when you're cyanotic, you have a bluish color to skin, a bluish color to the nail beds. This is the opposite of erythema, which is reddening of the skin. When you have bluish, it means you're depleted oxygen. And that's when the skin starts to look more bluish, where the fingertips look blue. You can see that the toenails start to look blue. The lips can start to look a little bit blue. And when it's really severe, the nails won't turn blue anymore. They'll turn what's called clubbing of the nails. Clubbing of the nails, this is a pretty serious condition that's seen with some bad cardiovascular illness, either like heart failure or lung issues. It's when the oxygen levels are really, really low. Okay. If it's not seen with oxygenation issues due to heart and severe lung issues, the only other time I've ever seen clubbing of the nails is when people have irritable bowel disease, some IBD. We'll see that. Now, erythema is when there's reddening of the skin. All right, that's due to the enlarged capillaries in the dermis. And you're either going to see it when your body's in an inflamed state, if there's a bad infection, if you're allergic to something, your skin may get itchy and red, or of course, if you burn yourself. So the redness can show in a variety of ways. This, I've had a patient that had this very, very bad, just like this. And what we did was we outlined it. We outlined the area that started like that. And I said, if tomorrow the redness starts to spread outside of those lines, go right to the hospital. The next day, it spread out, went to the hospital. He ended up, this was a very, very large gentleman, a little bit on the obese side, like really obese. When he came in, I asked if he'd take off his shoes and his socks, and he refused. I said, please take it off so I can inspect. He couldn't, because when you're that big and large, it's sometimes embarrassing for them, where they have lots of fungus on the feet and they can't bend down to tie their shoes again. And I tried to make him as comfortable as possible that I would, he just didn't want to do it. So the next day when he went to the hospital, of course, they mandated it. They took off his sock, took off his shoe, and he had a little cut between the great toe and the second toe. And he got an infection that moved into the bone. So he's lucky that they didn't have to amputate the leg, because this was a bone infection, but he did lose his great toe. Okay. So it can happen from an infection. It can happen topically. There's so many, it can happen from a sprained ankle, erythema. Okay. So a variety of reasons. This can happen bluing of the lips, right? If someone drowns, they pull them out of the water right away and everything's blue, and they, hopefully can resuscitate them. Vascular disease, peripheral vascular disease for cyanosis, where there's occlusion to blood vessels, can also cause the cyanosis. Allergies for erythema, infections, sprained ankles, physical trauma, things of that nature. And to finish up here, if you've ever seen the movie Powder, one of my favorite movies, it's an oldie but a goodie. It's called Powder. Go Google it if you haven't. Very, very touching story. And this boy is albino, all white, no hair, nothing. It's a congenital disorder that's characterized by complete or partial absence of the pigment on the skin, the hair, and the eyes, due to a defect in tyrosinase enzyme. Remember, we know what tyrosine is, but ACE is the enzyme, and it's involved in the production of melanin. So if you don't have tyrosinase, you can't pigment the skin. That's albino, and that kind of looks like this type of appearance. compared to vitiligo, where it becomes a patchy issue, where in vitiligo, it's a chronic disorder that's caused by the depigmentation, more of in a patchy type of situation, where it's an autoimmune disease of the actual melanocyte. So just in a particular region like this, there's no melanocyte. Over here, there's no melanocyte. So when the sun hits, everything around it will darken except for those areas. When people are under stress, it tends to bring the vitiligo out. Okay. And freckles, sometimes called liver spots, this is just a high concentrated area of melanocytes in one area, right? It's the opposite of vitiligo, where in vitiligo, there's an absence of melanocytes in an area. With freckles, it's a highly concentrated area of melanocytes in an area, and it darkens.